and welcome to Southwest Magazine. On today's episode, we are launching our New Brunswick book club with our first New Brunswick author, Julian H. Walker. Thank you for being here today, Julian.
It's a pleasure.
So we're going to hear a little bit about your book today, Wires Crossed, Memoir of a Citizen and Reporter in the Irving Press. Now, we did let our viewers know that you were going to be here today, so we have some questions submitted by viewers, but we'd love to start off just by hearing you talk a little bit about why you decided to write this book now, and maybe reading a couple excerpts for people who maybe haven't had the chance to read it yet.
Sure. Well, the overwhelming reason why I wrote the book is that I had taught a course called Free Press and Free Speech at St. Thomas University, and I had grown more and more concerned about what I was finding out about concentrated ownership in the media of New Brunswick, but also I knew full well that the Irvings also owned most of the large industry at the same time, and that was what I saw was most unhealthy, was the fact that they did both at the same time. And I started with that premise, but then I investigated further, and I realized that, for instance, the 2006 Senate committee stated that nowhere in the developed world is there a situation as critical as that in New Brunswick. In other words, high degree of concentration, but also ownership on the big industry side as well. And I also was quite touched by a professor at Mount Allison who said, after describing the strike at the Irving refinery in the 1990s, she said the Irvings are reporting on themselves. And that was sort of a graphic illustration to me of a problem. Mm-hmm. Nothing complicated, just they're reporting on themselves. And every reporter knows how important it is to be independent. You wouldn't want to be looking over your shoulder at your owner and saying, well, I don't know if I should say that, or, that type of thing. So I thought that was pretty important, and it's not that I felt that Casey Irving was, when he was living, that he was on the phone every morning say, don't report on that fire at the pulp mill, or don't do this, don't do that, or saying, don't make that the lead story, bury it. No one was saying that, but if you're a young reporter on the Irving Press today, or any day really, certainly when I was reporting there, you felt a little uneasy going out on a story, reporting on your boss mm-hmm. or your owner. And that isn't really, it is not how journalism is supposed to work. I do quote at the front of my book Robert Caro, who's quite a renowned American reporter who written a wonderful series of books about Lyndon Johnson, the former president. But he says that journalism is about searching for the truth, and you never get there, but you keep looking. And every step, every fact you get contributes to getting closer to the truth. And that was sort of his principle for good journalism. Not that you get there, but that you never stop looking for it. And that's in my conclusion as well. So that there's a few things to start off with.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to, I worked for a publication at one point that was owned by Rupert Murdoch, and you didn't have to be told not to write about to write about the Murdoch family in any kind of way. No. I'm wondering if you think that are New Brunswickers truly aware of what that means for the news that they have about their own province? Do you think it's been going on so long that maybe people aren't aware that there should be more?
I hear many people saying that. And also, some of the things I'm saying in the book, people tell me, I've thought that before, but I didn't want to say it out loud. New Brunswickers are very conscious of the Irvings being a very dominant force in the economy. And they're thinking about things like, oh, yeah, my son's going to be looking for a job next summer planting trees. You know, if I start flailing at the Irvings, you know, will he be getting that job or not? And quite possibly not, right? So it's something that all New Brunswickers are aware of, I think. Curiously, I put in the book a possible solution for the English daily press. That is that there be a trust fund set up, rather similar to what is in place for the French daily newspaper, what is now Lac Nouvelle. It's had several names, but they've all succeeded really because of that trust fund. And I've suggested that if the Irvings would get out of the daily newspaper and community newspaper business, there could be a trust fund for the English side that is set up that could help fund the English media. And it doesn't mean, you know, that you get orders from someone else now, the head of the trust fund or something. It's totally blind. No one working on the paper knows who's contributed to the trust fund or whatever. Curiously, I have found very few people who even know that Lac Nouvelle is supported by a trust fund. I know it, I lived it, I reported on it. But most people don't know that that's there or is even possible. So it's another example, I guess, that people don't really understand how dominant the Irvings are and what some of the possible alternatives are that would be good for the province.
So you talk about the future of funding near the end of your book for journalism, and you talk about the internet. You know, you don't really go into how the internet has changed the journalism model. You know, the news, click-driven news, stuff like that, which has really changed and competing with traditional journalism has sort of stolen all of their traditional funding.
Yeah, it is in there. I fault to a great extent Facebook and Google, having really destroyed the community press of New Brunswick. The daily press to a large extent as well. But I'm not saying that we stop Googling. I'm saying that for them, there has to be a sharing of revenues. There has to be payment for news stories used on Google or on Facebook that are written by, say, New Brunswickers. And if we did all that, we'd be doing a lot, you know, to change the current situation. As far as the internet for day to day, I'm wary of the internet because I value an editor in the process. Someone who's saying, where'd you get that? You know, show me. It doesn't ring true to me. So much of the internet is off the top, my opinion. I hate minority groups. I hate immigrants. You know, and if enough people say those sorts of nasty things, some others will agree.
And I think that, you know, when it comes to the internet, there's, you know, the top-down editor at the top, reporters at the bottom model for a newspaper isn't really going to ever work on the internet. But there are self-moderation ways that have worked, like Wikipedia, for example. You know, when I was in high school, you weren't allowed to use Wikipedia because it was not a reliable source. Now you are. Wikipedia, because Wikipedia has sources. So you
and
can
they're
check
hurting
Wikipedia's
too.
sources.
I've made
They're
a
always
small
hurting,
contribution to them.
Support them.
But I always greet them with a bit of caution too, because they're really as good as the last contributor to a topic.
True. Yeah,
right?
but it is sort of.
But it is wonderful, and it's not done for profit.
Though you do mention in your book, and this is not just happening in New Brunswick, but everywhere, the lack of investigative journalism. How do we bring that back? Obviously, it's when you're doing, as we all have done as writers, worked for different publications that are online, you're not necessarily being paid very well. So it's hard to get that assignment that really allows you to delve into a topic and to look for truth. You're often doing a few different articles a day.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We've done quite a bit of investigating from the Courier days. And that was rate busting. Like, no one paid us for our extra hours, but we sure put them in. I ask often when I'm talking to reporters about the book, I ask, when was the last time you read a full, balanced report in an Irving paper, taking account of the environmental side, the health side, and what the value to industry it is of using defoliants like glyphosate.
Right.
When was the time you saw an article in the Telegraph, an original article, not reporting on some committee meeting of the legislature or whatever, but an original piece of research around an issue like that? Dare you to find it. You know, it just doesn't happen. The Irving press does not do investigative reporting on big Irving topics. They'll cover them, but only in a cursory way. And you know, when you think of the Boston Globe unveiling the abuse in the Catholic Church of Boston, a team of reporters worked on that over 10 years. You know, that doesn't easily happen. I mean, when was your employer in Toronto offering you, you know, maybe a 5-year plan on that story?
Well, that's just it. Like, like everybody can agree on the social value of, you know, long-form investigative journalism.
Right.
But people don't want to invest in it. The people who make the decisions about where to spend their money in the newsroom don't want to invest in that because its return is very low. You know, its financial return. The social return is really good.
Well, I mean, I laugh about it in the book because we used to call it bush notes, like gleanings from, you know, Miles Corner, say, or whatever. We had to edit those every week for the paper because they're terribly badly written, and I shouldn't say that. You know, but we knew damn well that people were picking up the paper to see who was having tea with Mildred,
Right.
and who was pouring, and who was replenishing the pot, you know, and we knew darn well that our stories on the construction of the Point Lepreau nuclear plant weren't selling many newspapers.
Right.
But on the other hand, if you have some sort of structure, an editor, for instance, and I was, you know, a small town editor, and we put in the hours, as I say. If you have someone is challenging a young reporter on accuracy, on libel, you know, the best defense, I haven't been sued yet, but the best defense against libel is the truth, right? And I was very careful about how I shot my mouth off about the Irvings, because I know you can't do that without backup.
And even if you don't work, I notice this in other parts of Canada too. Maybe you're not working for Bell at the time, but it's very likely you will be in a couple years. There's only a handful of employers in the media in a lot of ways in Canada, other than the independent
the
outlets.
concentration problem is not just New Brunswick's problem. It's just that it's more acute here. And we come very close to one voice because the Irving media has so much power over government that, and you've heard, I'm sure, vague whispers that our premier used to work in the Irving industry.
What?
Few people know that now.
Oh my word.
If we play devil's advocate, though, Julian, some people might argue that the Irvings are saving the media scene in New Brunswick, that if it wasn't for them, our population is so low that we wouldn't have these papers. How do you respond to people that make that argument?
Well, it's a good argument, but I think the Irvings like to have a chicken in every pot. They like to blanket coverage. They don't tend to concentrate on French fries. That's our product. They like to build support for their products, their various products, in every community almost. And in a subtle way, I think their hold on the newspapers helps them do that. Mm-hmm. Always there, always a little bit in control. Things don't get away on them. That sort of thing.
They've also intensely vertically integrated all of their businesses, which is why they're so dominant in New Brunswick. We've allowed them to do that, and now you can't put that cat back in the bag. And so when an upstart like here tries to compete with the Irvings, they can't attract their advertisers. They can't hold on to their advertisers when Irving is pulling them back, and they can't compete with the cost of running their business because Irving sets the prices for the raw pulp. They set the prices for the paper that it's printed on, set the prices for all of the logistics of how it's moved around. They own all of those companies.
Yeah.
And so if you're a small newspaper, you're not ever going to be able to compete with the Irvings in that front.
No, that's why I think they should get the hell out of the media business.
Yeah.
You mentioned here, it was a hell of a good little paper.
Yeah.
And it did compete. And that's why they got bought.
Yeah.
And after the year 2000, the Irvings, JDI, bought almost all the remaining community newspapers in the province.
We definitely do try to stress that this corner of New Brunswick has CHCO and also the Courier, so it is sort of an anomaly in what some people might call a company province. And is that a fair description of New Brunswick?
Well, I said to someone that New Brunswick is a company town, but we love it. It's a beautiful place. People are very kind to each other here. It has, I don't want to get emotional here, but it has many redeeming qualities as a province that other snootier places don't have. But then there's the dark side too, which is a very high degree of control of our lives, and not just kids getting summer jobs that way, but a lot of people are frightened for their jobs.
Right.
It's in the book a lot, but you take those billboards along the side of the road, Irving is hiring. It's mainly J.D. Irving who does this. But they say, over the next X number of months, we will be hiring across the Maritimes, a huge number of staff. Mm-hmm. And so what are you going to think? Should I be getting a job through the government, or should I go to Irving if I want a job?
You have two viewer questions, and I'm going to put them on this topic that I thought maybe I should bring up now. And some of the questions that the viewers sent in, we've covered actually. One person wrote in, this is Roger W. He said, "You're critical of Irving ownership, but you also seem to have a lot of respect for members of the Irving family too. How do you really feel about the Irvings?" And then someone else, Sarah T, asked, "Why do so many New Brunswickers seem scared of the Irvings?" So I'll put those two questions together.
Okay. Well, I think I've answered the question that a lot of New Brunswickers are scared of the Irvings. And it's because their bread and butter depends on the Irvings. But on the other hand, the first part of the questions, I think I do have respect for some of the Irvings that I know, particularly J.K. Irving. There's a whole chapter devoted to him, because when I was at the St. Croix Courier, I was appalled at a pollution situation at Latang near St. George. Maybe you're maybe too young to remember, but there was a stink hole there that most people knew about, and the smell was the rotten egg smell, which sounds okay, but H2S is a very dangerous gas. It causes lungs that fill up with liquid and usually cause heart failure with chronic exposure. But on the Courier, we heard a lot about this. We heard a lot of complaints, and we started to research it. And we were slow on the job. Like it took a lot of rate busting, weekend hours and stuff, trying to get the story together. And finally I got it out. And we wrote a whole issue of the paper on that issue. So come back to the respect issue. J.K. Irving had just bought Lake Utopia paper. It was a disaster. They had flushed all kinds of wood fiber down the sewage pipe. And the cause that Irving's engineers discovered, maybe they knew it all along, but we found out about it, that it was the salt water mixing with the rotting fiber that was causing H2S to be produced. In other words, there was a causeway across the Latang estuary, and it was allowing salt water in. And as a result of him realizing that he had a hot potato on his hands, he got it fixed. He put a different type of causeway in there so that the fresh water could flow out, but the salt water couldn't flow in. That was a very simple solution, but it was costly. And if he hadn't been a conservationist and to quite an extent an environmentalist, that solution wouldn't have happened. So I appreciated that when I was there with the paper, and I praised him. When I was Deputy Minister of the Environment, I kind of ran up against him more. We put in a lot of anti-pollution measures under Vaughan Blaney, who was the delightful minister at the time. A very human, funny guy, would go out to every pollution site and in his Wellington boots and smile. But we put a lot of controls in there. We hired a bunch of ex-RCMP cops, and we started charging Irving, which was not done in New Brunswick at that era. And so I met J.K. Irving across the table about that more than once. And I said, Mr. Irving, times are changing. You're going to have to mend your ways. And he was very annoyed with me one day, and he was across the table, and he stood up. He's a great big man. And I say in the book, I thought he was going to come across the table and greet me more intimately, whatever, by the throat. But then he did what he always did with me, which is he said, well, we've got to do the right thing. And he sat back down. So I guess that's how I developed my respect for him. Some of the other Irvings I don't know, and I can't say I respect them hugely. J.K. Irving's son, Jim, is a very hard driving guy. He is like KC was. When he goes into a committee to meet with legislators, he tells them what he thinks, and they listen. There's quite a passage in the book that I could read about it a little later, but Casey was very worried about the tax concessions that they had been afforded by the government of New Brunswick back prior to the 1960s. And Louis Robichaud, the Premier, this was another major motivation for my book, because I did quite a bit of historical research on this. But the concessions were going to go. It was part of the equal opportunity reform communities that could locate through low taxes, major industry in their community, could fund better schools, better social services, and so on. And Louis Robichaud was very courageous in fighting that. And in the end, they had to cave in quite a lot to Irving. They said, there won't be any more concessions, but these ones, well, we'll leave them in place. But there was a lot of fight to get to that point. And it didn't come easily for Casey Irving. He came to the legislature and he said, almost damn it. He didn't say damn it because he didn't swear, but we opened the refinery in St. John because we wanted to employ New Brunswickers. We didn't open it to shut it down the next year or whatever. So he was extremely emphatic that Irving stands for job creation in New Brunswick. And whether that's entirely true or not, they made an awful lot of New Brunswickers think that it was true, just by his, I call it command in the book. He commanded his situations.
We're out of time today, but thank you for writing the book. We'd love to have you back again soon to talk about it more. You can buy Wires Crossed at La Moline Boutique in St. Andrews, at Westminster Books in Fredericton, or at Chapters and Indigo and Amazon as well. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Andrew Sutton.
Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.